Hello and welcome back. I'm Angela Nishimoto and this is Botany 101. If you will recall, earlier in the semester, we went to Foster Botanical Garden. Well, today we're going to have the next part of that, okay, that field trip. So here we go, get in your seats, get set, and have fun, all right? And I'll have fun too, all right? So enjoy. Hello there, here we are again. Okay, here we are at Foster Garden. Okay, what we have here, now look at this. Isn't this magnificent? This is called the cannonball tree, all right? And for one thing, look at this. Note the way that the flowers are coming off it. Here's, you have one flower, it's kind of fleshy. It's kind of like a pinkish color to red. Another thing about it too, this one here is probably pollinated by bats or something like that, even though there was a bee on this just a little while ago. Now another thing about this tree, you can see the way all these inflorescences are kind of snaking out of the trunk this way. Do you remember the term for that? Right? When you have the flowers coming right out of the trunk. Remember what it's called? What is it called? Think about it. Okay. It's called cauliflory. Remember, cauliflory has to do with the inflorescence coming right out of the trunk like this. And it's a very interesting flower. It has a really kind of sweet, kind of fruity kind of smell, and usually that's pretty diagnostic in terms of maybe being pollinated by bats, okay? Anyway, so here we are, nice cannonball tree with these cauliflowerous flowers. And then, of course, what's going to happen, right, is that the flowers will eventually become fruits, all right? So what we have here, okay, we have another cannonball tree, this one loaded with fruits, okay, and the fruit here looks like a cannonball, just like it's self-evident, right? And if we actually look at the inside of the fruit, here it is. It's rather unappetizing in terms of what it looks like. It has sort of like a musty smell too. So it's not very likely that people eat it, okay? But here we have ants scurrying around in here. You can see the little seeds in here also, yeah? So of course, what happens? Remember, what does a fruit result in? It's actually the result of pollination. Now, first of all, the fruit begins as a flower, right, as a flower, and then after the action of some kind of insect, some kind of bird, some kind of mammal, what will happen? Actually, you have the transfer of pollen from one flower to another in most cases, okay? And what you have is a pollen being transferred from an anther, okay, onto a stigma of the pistil. Remember, the four parts of a flower, you have the sepals, you have the petals, you have the stamens, and you have the pistil, right? The stamens being the male part that have anthers, right? The anthers make the pollen. Transfer of pollen, okay, from an anther to a stigma is called pollination. Then after that, you have the fusion of sperm with egg, and that is called fertilization. And do you remember that in the flowering plants, the ones that have flowers, right? What then happens is you have two sperms, double fertilization. One sperm fusing with the egg, okay, that becomes the embryo, which is a new baby plant inside of the seed. The other sperm, okay, fusing with the polar nuclei, making endosperm, which is nutritive tissue that nourishes the little embryo inside of the seed. Okay, the seed itself, what is a seed itself? If I can get one out of here. A seed, okay, is actually three parts. You have the seed coat, remember the seed coat? Then you also have the embryo and you have the endosperm. So that is what constitutes a seed. And these are flowering plants because what happens is that the seed or the seeds are contained within a fruit, in a container, in a vessel. Okay? Anyway, so here you have a rather unappetizing looking fruit, but you never know. Maybe to an ant it looks good because there are ants running around on here. Okay, so they're getting something out of it. All right? Okay, now here, this tree is sort of like off over there, and what you can see is some fruits. This is another plant that is probably bat pollinated. And I know I have students, whenever I brought them here, they'd say, there are bats over here, but I think probably is pollinated by some other, like a honeybee or something, but maybe in its native place, it's probably pollinated by bats. You can see that the fruit are pendant. That means that the flowers were pendant also. They were hanging down, and very likely if it's hanging down like that, kind of far away from the branch, you know, bats actually navigate by sonar, right? They send out sound and it bounces back to them. And they are amazingly accurate. They can tell where different things are from just the way that the sound bounces back to them. So what happens is that probably this flower is actually like a red, dull red color flower. It doesn't have a very nice smell. Probably not pollinated by flies though. Remember, flies pollinate carrion smelling or fecal smelling sort of things, very nasty smelling things, to us anyway. To a fly, it's heaven. But here you have a hanging fruit, okay, hanging flower. Remember, the fruit is a later stage. After the flower is pollinated and fertilized, the ovary develops into the fruit. You know, with the seed inside, right? You have the fruit, you have the seed, you have the embryo, all nested in each other. So this is probably, in its native area, probably pollinated by bats. Okay, bats can somehow navigate and they can hover. They will actually hover in front of a flower, feeding on whatever food it can get from it, pollen or nectar, and inadvertently pollinating it. All right. Anyway, so here we go. Right. Let's see. Right. Alrighty, so here we are. Okay, we're under the spreading chocolate tree. This is actually the source of real chocolate, the stuff of which, you know, Nestle's has been made, you know, all those different kinds of Hershey, Pennsylvania and all that kind of stuff. So what you have here, we have here an actual coffee tree. And one of the things you might be able to see is that the leaves are sort of, you know, not very in good condition. It's because, you know, where the plant actually evolved and was specialized, it has been under cultivation for thousands of years. Okay, so generally the people who cultivated this plant in Mesoamerica and in South America, they needed to make a plantation of it. Not just that, is that over the chocolate trees, they had to have sort of nurturing mother of chocolate growing over them to shade them from too much sun, and also as windbreaks to provide blockage for too much wind. Okay, so generally chocolate trees, they're kind of fragile actually. You know, they are kind of demanding of certain kinds of conditions. So they tend to get damaged fairly easily. They're kind of fragile in some ways. Another thing about this plant is that it might be a little hard to see, but we have these little tiny flowers. Okay, so these little flowers are coming off the main branches. And remember, that's called cauliflory, all right, cauliflory. And another thing about it too is that this little flower is going to swell into a fruit like that, right? The ovary, which you can barely even see on the flower, is going to be swelling to this size. Not just that size, but it'll eventually get to be about this big. A football size shaped fruit, maybe like this. Okay, it's going to be whoa, you know. Anyway, so this fruit, okay, inside of it, of course, will be the developing embryos, which are inside the seeds. The seeds are what they call the chocolate nibs. Okay. Now another thing too is that the seeds are embedded in a sort of whitish kind of pulp, and the pulp is sort of sweet tart. Right. I had a student who was from Brazil, a very nice lady, and the thing is, when she was a little kid, they used to have this really great drink. She said it was the best drink. What people would do is they would actually get the full-grown fruit, which, by the way, you have to take off the tree. The fruit doesn't just fall off the tree because this plant has been so under cultivation for such a long time. So they take the fruit, you know, take it off, split it up, and then what they do is they take the pulp, the white pulp, plus the seeds that were in it, you know, kind of squish it up a little bit, put water in it, a little bit of sugar, and she said it was the best drink. And of course, a lot of people really do love the flavor of sweet tart, you know, a little bit of tartness and a little bit of sweetness. That's very good. And she said as kids, they could actually be chewing the coffee nibs, you know, as they're drinking the fluid. So she said it was delicious. She said it was the best kind of thing. So that might be kind of an interesting thing for you folks to try if you have the patience to grow a chocolate tree and try to see about that. Yeah? All right, so chocolate, let's see. Yes, so the chocolate processing, pretty much what do we know as chocolate is not at all what it used to be. Remember that I said it was from Mesoamerica? Well, historically, I guess people, when they made the drink chocolato, they would actually have like a thick, fatty sort of drink. So for a lot of Europeans, after the Europeans kind of came to the New World, took back plants with them, right? People in the New World would actually be using this pulverized seeds, right, which is kind of oily, has a very high cocoa butter content. Okay, so what they had to do when they learned how to do the processing of chocolate to make it more palatable, okay, for European taste, they took out a lot of the cocoa butter, they put in sugar, they put in, let's see what else, they put in vanilla, okay, so that is actually the chocolate as we know it now. And of course, you know, if you like chocolate, it's very good, and chocolate is actually pretty healthy for you. It's a stimulant, you know, it's a mind-altering substance, a mood-altering substance, and people can actually take chocolate to kind of pep themselves up, especially women are known about chocolate, okay? Another thing about chocolate, it does have something called theobromine in it. Theobromine is like something that is supposed to work on your brain as if you're in love. It's a very intensely pleasurable sort of feeling you can get from eating chocolate or drinking chocolate milk, as we call it. Okay. Now the thing too is the name of the plant is Theobroma cacao. Cacao refers, to the fact that it's chocolate, and Theobroma means food of the gods. Theo means gods, like theology is when somebody goes to school to study, religion and being a minister, right? So Theo means gods, and broma refers to ambrosia or food. So in the native places where this plant is from, people consider it to be the food of the gods, to be very, very special indeed. Okay, and so do we. We consider chocolate to be very special as well. Another thing about chocolate is if you're worried about your health consequences, if you're worried about too much fat or milk or that kind of thing, a good thing to go is dark chocolate. Dark chocolate is the best. Usually it's semi-sweet, very rich in a chocolate flavor, and it is actually very healthy for you. They'll say that eating chocolate, eating dark chocolate can actually be as healthful for somebody as drinking a glass of red wine with all the flavonoids and other health consequences, that you can get good health benefits from that. So I would never argue with that. Red wine and chocolate, All right? Okay, so here we have another caffeinated beverage plant here, okay? This, of course, is Coffea arabica. It's coffee, okay? Isn't that a great thing, right? So here we have a little bit of its leaves here, and we have a fruit. Okay, so it would have flowered, and after pollination, fertilization, you have the development of a fruit. Now this little green fruit will actually turn a bright red. Okay, this is why when people are harvesting coffee, they call it a coffee cherry. Yeah, they're red. And inside of it, there's a little bit of a pulp. I think the pulp might be edible in this case too, but there's a pulp, and then inside of that you have like two seeds, which we call the coffee bean. Okay. Anyway, so Coffea arabica, you can tell where it's from. Okay, by the fact that its name is from the Arabian Peninsula and also from Ethiopia. Okay, so this plant also, its origins are just shrouded in mystery, but of course it has a whole lot of impact on the world today. What is being a student without drinking coffee? Just like what is being a student without drinking beer? Okay, everybody has to go through those rites of passages. All right, so coffee shops, that's where you see a whole bunch of students, and I guess I could see you there too. All right, so coffee, very important. Okay, here I am under the spreading banana tree. Okay, this plant is actually called Maya, okay, in Hawaiian, Maya, also known as Musa in the Musaceae. You can see maybe from the leaves, okay, for one thing, that you have parallel venation. Another thing you see is this so-called trunk. Okay, people call them banana trees, but of course, they're not really trees, all right? What we have here is a whole bunch of leaf bases. Okay, the stem of the banana is actually underground, okay? So if you were actually to chop down a banana tree and then look at it from the side, what you'll have is all the leaf bases forming what we call the trunk, all right? Now another thing about this plant, that even if you do actually cut one down or you have to carry one, be sure you don't get it on your clothes, because this is actually the plant that has a stain that is most persistent. If you get the sap of banana on your clothes, it just won't ever come out. There's no way you can get it out. Anyway, Maya banana is actually a starch food of the Polynesians. Some bananas, you can eat them raw. Okay, those are the ones that most of us are familiar with, right? The sweet bananas. You also have starchy bananas, and for some people, they call them plantains. So the Hawaiians, the Polynesian people who became the Hawaiians had like quite a few different varieties. And of these varieties, only 3 were available for women to eat. Maya was generally kapu to women. I believe that it is actually a body form or kinolau, okay, of one of the major gods. I believe it was Kanaloa. Okay, so Maya was kapu to women, okay, for the most part. And in fact, Maya could be offered in some of the temples as an offering, okay, to the gods. All right, so Maya, also known as banana, Musa species, whether Musa acuminata or Musa paradisica. Now here's another plant, very special to Polynesian peoples. Yeah? This, of course, is ava. Okay, ava. So some places they call it kava. And the most noteworthy part that you can identify it, you can see for one thing, the leaf is heart-shaped. You have this sort of like a quilted appearance to the leaf. Okay, it is another mind-altering plant. This is one that's supposed to help your muscles relax, and people will tend to make a drink from it. a characteristic of it that makes it most recognizable, it has these jointed stems, okay? The jointed stems are swollen at the nodes. Remember the nodes and the internodes, two parts of the stem? So at the nodes, it's swollen. The stem is more slender in the internode section, okay? This is called also Piper methysticum, okay? It's actually related to black pepper, all right? Another thing about this plant is that you can actually take part of the leaf, chew on it, and if it's a good variety, generally your mouth will get to be a little tingly or numb because it has substances in it, all right, that will actually be mind-altering substances. Another thing is that the active principle is most concentrated in the root of this plant. I know that right now, I think that there is now again a kava bar, okay, on Kapahulu, off Kapahulu Avenue. So there is, you know, an interest, a resurgence of interest in this plant, some of its medicinal properties as well. Now, actually, what I'd heard also is that kava has been banned in Germany because I think that they've found out, at least in Germany, that taking a lot of this substance can actually cause liver problems. Yeah, but you know, some people can drink it and they be fine. Okay. Another thing too is that generally people traditionally in Hawaii would use this to kind of help calm down after a hard day fishing or working in the taro patches. People would actually take a drink made from the root of this and they would quaff it, follow it with a chaser, a small banana or something, a little bit of fish, something to take the taste away because ava is a little bit bitter. The word ava itself means bitter. Yeah. So then it is actually a plant that is quite revered. And I believe the darker varieties, the ones with the very dark purpley blackish stems, would be those that would be generally reserved for the ali'i in Hawaii. But in Hawaii, all men, all people could drink kava. It was not limited to only the elite. Okay, so kava, important plant, okay, in Hawaii. Now here we have a plant known as olena, okay? It's also known as turmeric. This plant here, again, parallel venation, okay, in the leaf, so it is a monocot. Another thing about turmeric is the part most times people use was the underground rhizome, okay, the underground horizontal stem of this plant. It's very similar to ginger. In fact, it is in the family, the ginger family, the Zingiberaceae. If you were to take the rhizome, cut it open, it's kind of like a yellow or a gold or orangey in color. They say that the older the rhizome is, the more color it is. And Hawaiian people use it as a colorant for their kapa or their tapa, their bark cloth plant. Okay? So here you have turmeric, also known as olena. It is also used in South Asian cooking, in Southeast Asian cooking as an addition to curries. Yep, you have turmeric, you have cumin, you have coriander, all those different sorts of things that people in South Asia and in Southeast Asia make up their own little, they make it from the fresh herbs and it's really wonderful. There's nothing better, I think, than curry, you know? Vegetarian curry or chicken curry, any kind of curry you like. If it's a well-made dish, this is fantastic. Now another plant that we want to look at is this magnificent plant here, nice big leaves. People know it as tea leaf, also known as ki, Cordyline fruticosa. Some people might not know that it is actually a flowering plant. Okay, many uses for this plant. You could, for one thing, in times of food shortages or famines, you can dig up the root. Okay, you can actually cook it in an oven, in an imu or some other kind of oven, and it's almost like molasses candy because there's so much sugar in it. Another thing about this plant is it has cultural implications as well as uses, such as you could use the leaf utilitarian. Okay, utilitarian uses such as like a plate to eat food from because people used to eat with their fingers mostly. All right. You could also use the leaf for wrapping food in, wrapping offerings in. You could use the leaf for making sandals, making rain capes from it too. All right. Another thing is that some people think that this is a prototype for something called kahili, the feathered standards that the Hawaiian ali'i used to kind of show where they were and what they were doing. So another thing, religious uses too. Even now, if you have a priest or a kahuna doing a blessing or doing some kind of religious ceremonies, they will oftentimes wear a lei made out of the tea leaf. They will also oftentimes use a leaf of the tea leaf to use blessings, to actually dip in water and bless a particular place or a particular thing in itself, okay? Now another plant that we want to talk about here, pretty important, it's also a food plant, okay? So this is another Polynesian introduction. This is Ape, A-P-E, okay? Alocasia macrorrhiza, and not that much is known of the uses of this plant. But people do know that people in other Polynesian countries use it as a food, as a starch reserve, okay, because it has a corm similar to the kalo, because this is actually a relative to the kalo, yeah? So you can actually use the root, you can bake it, you know, you can cook it and eat it as a starch. Okay, I've never myself tasted ape, but maybe I'm looking forward to it. Someday I'm going to be a good cook, you know? Anyway, so that might have to wait. Anyway, so here we go, okay, and we'll continue, all right? All right, here we are, right in front of the great ulu tree, the great ulu, yeah? One of the things you notice is that it has a very beautiful leaf pattern here, very classic in the art of Hawaiian quilting. This is something that ladies nowadays, you know, get to do, yeah, in what spare time that they have. This is also probably an excellent sort of activity that a woman could do with her daughter, yeah, especially when it gets to be a bit of a difficult time in the family, like when the daughter is growing up and getting independent. Now, one of the things you will also notice is that if you injure the tree, if you were to break off a fruit or break off a leaf, what you'll soon find is that you have a little bit of latex coming out. Okay, the latex was useful for the Polynesian people, the people who became the Hawaiians, because the Hawaiian people use the latex for caulking canoes. They also use the latex for catching birds. The bird catcher would use the sap to put on his stick, to put on the branch to catch Hawaiian native birds, for making the great feathered cloaks, the feathered helmets, the feathered standards, all those beautiful things. Another thing that people could use the latex for is little kids could use it as a little chewing gum. They could take some of the sap out, let it congeal a little bit, give it to the child, and the child could exercise their teeth, their jaws, their gums, and try to make them stronger. That might be a good thing. Now, another thing about this plant, right up there, there's a fruit, okay? The fruit develops from the female inflorescence. The female inflorescence has many dozens and dozens of female flowers on a structure that is sort of round, sort of spherical, yeah? What happens then is that after pollination and fertilization, that develops into a fruit. The fruit is made up of many flowers, many stigmas, many styles, many ovaries. So the fruit itself is something that is called a multiple fruit because it develops from multiple flowers. Now, so you have a female inflorescence that develops into a multiple fruit. You'll also have a male inflorescence that sort of hangs down like this. It's like a finger-shaped structure with many male flowers that produces the pollen. So you have male flowers in male inflorescences, female flowers in female inflorescences on the same tree. So if you have male flowers or staminate flowers, female flowers, or pistillate flowers on the same tree, remember what that's called? It's called moniaceae. Do you remember that? So this is a very grand tree. Now the thing too is that people could use the wood from this tree to make surfboards, to also you make outrigger booms for the canoes, all right? Another thing in mythology is that the god Ku, in myth and in a story, is supposed to have turned himself into an ulu tree for his family, to save his family for starvation. So they could actually pick the fruits and eat the fruits and remain alive, yeah? Another thing too is that though ulu traditionally hasn't been one of the main food plants of the Hawaiian people, still it was something that people could eat, yeah? In the Marquesas, another group of Pacific islands, the ulu was actually a major starch, whereas in Hawaii, of course, it was the kalo. Okay, here we are, okay, and I'm standing in front of a shrub or a tree which is deadly poisonous, okay? It's called Nerium oleander, also known as oleander, okay? So if you were to take a look at a piece of a stem of this plant, remember stems are made of nodes and internodes, right? Nodes are where the leaves are attached, and internodes are the spaces between the nodes. So if you were to look at this and kind of count, well, you see 3 leaves at each node, right? Another thing is that generally if you have 1 leaf at each node, that's called an alternate leaf arrangement, okay? If you have 2 leaves at each node, that is opposite leaf arrangement. And thirdly, if you have 3 leaves at each node, that's called world leaf arrangement, all right? Anyway, so this plant is noteworthy because it's very poisonous. It's in a plant family known as the Apocynaceae. People also call it the dog bane family, okay? So what is dog bane? Dog, of course, is a dog, right? And bane means bad, bad. So what they did is they probably used members of this family to poison animals with. I think they have flea bane in this family as well. Okay, so this is a relative of the plumeria, right? Botany101. Some of the members of this family have beautiful, beautiful flowers, but many of them are pretty toxic. This is supposed to be so deadly poisonous that there could be, maybe it's an urban legend, where people say that if you actually find a twig of this at the beach and use it to cook some hot dogs or marshmallows on, well, very likely the people who would eat that would die. That's what I've heard anyway. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's actually a legend, okay? Anyway, so we have Nerium oleander, okay? Another thing about this plant, if you remember from some years ago, there was a movie and also a book, of course, that the movie was based on called White Oleander. Apparently, a woman was in prison for this, and she was actually convicted after she was tried, okay? She was tried and convicted for murdering someone. And how did she murder him? What she did is she made an infusion, right? I guess she heated it up. She made an infusion or a distillation of this plant, mixing it with something called DMSO. DMSO is a substance that allows people to absorb things transdermally through the skin. So what did she do? She got that extract from the plant, mixed it with this DMSO, put it on a doorknob where this guy was going to be touching, and he died from that. Thing to keep in mind. So very much a worrisome plant. You probably don't want to have it in your yard if you have real little kids that are likely to put things in their mouth running around. Another interesting thing about this plant locally in Hawaii is that it is a plant that people use on the freeways. This is something you see on the freeways. They do fine with all that noxious gases, the carbon monoxide and all the other stuff coming out of the cars. They're fine. They have these pretty flowers, white or pink or red, okay? Nerium oleander. Here I am standing still under a tree known as the Be Still tree, okay? This one here is related to the oleander. It's in the same family, the dogbane family, the Apocynaceae. It also seems to have leaves in whorls of 3, like the oleander, all right? Now another thing about this plant is that why does it have the name that it does, okay? For one thing, somebody had told me that generally if the wind blows, the leaves kind of shimmer, and somebody can go, oh, be still, because it's moving too much. Another way that it could have been named alternatively is that generally if you eat any part of this plant, you're going to be still because it's also poisonous as well. Okay, very beautiful tree, used extensively by Nimitz Highway, by the different kinds of freeways as well. Does also very well. So it's funny that both oleander as well as the be still tree are very good and thrive in areas that most plants would die of toxicity from. Right, the be still tree. Hello, so here we are under a kukui tree. Okay. This is kukui, K-U-K-U-I, also known as Alerites molocana. And you can also, the common name for it is a candle nut tree. Why do you think that is? Because people could use the nut, okay, of the inside of the seed, which is inside, of course, the fruit, is that they could use it to make candles, okay, or light. Lama, yeah, light. So Native Hawaiian people used to use this plant as light, and there are other uses for it as well. Now, another noteworthy thing is that generally you see these leaves, like this one here. Okay. Secondly, we have this one here. And thirdly, we have this one here. These all came from the same tree, the tree that's above me right now, all right? Anyway, so you can see from this that the kukui nut tree, even in the leaves, very morphologically, very variable, even in the same tree. It is a Polynesian introduction, extremely useful. In fact, this is one of the most useful trees of the Polynesian people, okay? The nut itself too, you could actually roast it, mash it up, make it into a relish known as inamona. And another thing too is that nowadays you can get inamona, in certain places very specially, and you can also get it in poke. Poke with the raw fish and the limu or the seaweed, plus the kukui nut stuff, plus salt, Hawaiian salt, and all that kind of stuff, all that good stuff, Very delicious, especially when you're kind of throwing back the beers. Anyway, so poke, very important locally too, in terms of pauhana sort of things that people can do, yeah? So we have this very variable tree, and another thing you can see is that the leaves, many of them are like a gray-green color, yeah? if you were to go along the H3 or up the Poly, any place where you can see some of the forested areas, you can kind of look from a distance, and when you see a kind of silvery green color, that's generally where the kukui trees are. And if you go all the way up onto the ridges, that's where kukui trees are too. And my own thought is that the kukui trees up there were probably planted. People might say, oh, they can propagate themselves. They make tons of fruit, flowers, they make tons of fruits, they make a lot of seeds, so they can actually propagate themselves. That's true. But at the same time, people had to take them up there somehow, and I guess the fruits can kind of tumble down in the rivers or in the streams, even the temporary ones, right? And kind of plant themselves. Very prolific tree, all right? Another thing about it too is that it was also a source of 4 different kinds of copper dyes, whether from the leaves, whether from the bark, whether from the charred kernels. And the charred kernels were also used for tattoo ink. They used to use bird bones, little hammers to actually put in the Polynesian tattoos here in Hawaii in the olden days. So if you look at old lithographs of Hawaiian people, first prints made by voyagers who came to the islands from Europe and also from the mainland, you'll see many of the people that they illustrated were actually tattooed, including dancers and other people as well. So here is kukui, very useful tree, and it's noteworthy to remark that generally this tree is the only tree that was introduced by the Polynesians that's considered weedy. Okay, it's not really weedy. It's maybe, according to Dr. Abbott, more that people don't use it as much as they used to. This could actually be a possible solution to the problems that we have with energy right now in our country and in Hawaii, all right? The kukui tree, our state tree, very important. Hi, can you guess what tree I'm standing under? Can you look at it and tell me what it is? It might be a little hard, but let's give you a little hint. You see this structure here? This is actually an inflorescence. You can see a flower here and some buds on it. This, of course, is the inflorescence of noni, yeah? Oftentimes, Morinda citrifolia. Oftentimes you can identify this plant by the glossy leaves, very, very attractive plant. It doesn't get to be that big of a plant, maybe about 20, 25 feet tall, you know, very attractive. Okay, member of the Rubiaceae in the coffee family, related to coffee. And then what happens is that after pollination and fertilization, you have this structure here, multiple flowers, making this structure here. And this, of course, is a very ripe fruit of the noni, all right? Now, this very ripe fruit, you can see it's just dripping into my hand right now, is, panacea. In fact, in the olden days, this is another Polynesian introduction. In the olden days, people used the leaf, to try to help with contusions, bruises, broken bones. They use half-ripe fruit. You can actually cut it in half, put it on a boil, bring the boil to a head. Now recently, in fairly recent years, maybe the last 20 years or so, people have been using the ripe and overripe fruit, this is very ripe, actually to make sort of like a drink. You'd collect the whitish, almost ripe fruits from the tree, put them in a bottle, okay, let it sit in the sun for a couple of weeks, then there's like a kind of a reddish, brownish liquid that oozes out of the fruits, and people drink that as a tonic, okay? So this is something that you can make yourself, although I know some people, pasteurize it to make sure you don't have the growth of, bad bacteria. But people take this as a tonic for one thing. People take it as a tonic to kind of help prevent heart disease, also to kind of help prevent cancer as well. People also use it for other things as well. So what they'll do is that they'll take this as a tonic. And for a while I took it too, and it was good. I didn't actually make the noni juice myself. I did make some noni juice in a big bottle, but I was afraid to drink it because I was afraid that I was going to get botulism or something. But what I do is I buy it, from one of the drugstores, and I would put it with a little bit of apple cider vinegar, fill it up with cherry juice or any kind of grape juice, something like that, and just take it. And it really helped, I think. I seem to be less tired and less enervated as I used to, So it really did work. I stopped doing that, because if you buy noni juice, it's expensive, okay? But if you make your own and if you pasteurize it, be sure that if you ever do any kind of canning or making any juice at home, that you pasteurize it. That is like raising the temperature of a substance to a certain height and then leaving it there for a while to make sure harmful bacteria and other microorganisms are killed. But nowadays people use noni juice for all kinds of ways, and there are people who swear that it cured them of cancer, like malignant tumors and all kinds of things, okay? Anyway, this may be a useful plant. And of course, research institutions all over the place are just studying the efficacies of these, and they're finding out that it does maybe have anti-immunogenic properties, which of course, cancer is actually mitosis or cell division out of control. Okay, Noni, Morinda citrifolia. Stay tuned, you never know what's going to happen with this plant. Okay, here what you have behind me is something called the lipstick plant. Okay, you can see the fruits are very kind of hairy and they're red, which is kind of interesting, makes for a very interesting texture. And if we were to open a fruit, it has, you know, these seeds in it that is covered by all this pigmented stuff. Yeah, I believe that Amazonian natives use this for ornamenting themselves, and also I think that women do use it for staining their lips and other parts too. It's called the lipstick plant, also known as bixa. Right? Right over there, further on here, we have a plant, of course, known as pomegranate. So a lot of people, very health conscious people, would know that pomegranate juice is really hot right now and also very expensive, you know? So they say maybe pomegranate juice is special because it's new. Novelty is something that really drives a lot of market forces, you know? So I think, my own opinion, grape juice, cranberry juice, all that kind that has a red, pink, purple coloration to it, all of that is good. It's used as antioxidants. And remember oxidation, right? Oxidation is something that we all go through because we do cellular respiration. But when you do cellular respiration, you will actually generate kind of dangerous chemicals called superoxide radicals, right? And what happens is that as that careens around in your body, it can actually damage your cells as well as the molecules that make up your cells, okay? So generally, they say that if you eat pigmented food or drink pigmented juice of some kind, it actually is very healthy for you, yep? Because it is acting as an antioxidant. Vitamin E, okay, let's see, selenium, vitamin C, a whole plethora of things that you could take, okay, can act as antioxidants. And this is very, very important if you want to slow the progression of age, okay, because they say that cell death is actually oxidation running out of control. We can't help it because we do cellular respirations. Plants can't help it either, yeah? They too seem to have a finite life. Anyway, eat healthy, drink healthy, okay? Be safe. Hi there. Okay, here we have a plant that is dear to the hearts of everybody around the world practically. This is actually one of the main sources of sugar, all right? This is sugar cane, also known as Saccharum officinarum. This plant was a Polynesian introduction, and the Hawaiian people used it for various purposes, among which they used it sort of like a chaser. You know, whenever you take medicaments or medicine, usually it's bitter, yeah? So they would usually follow it with some squeezed out juice from the stem, yeah? And take that, and that'll make the medicine taste a little better. My own opinion too, I think this is true, is that generally, even now, pharmaceutical drugs and such are generally, if you taste the pill a little bit, it's sugary or it's salty. So maybe the sugar or the salt can act as a carrier to take it into your body so your body can absorb it optimally. You know, so sugar might have actually that function as well. And as you know, in the history of Hawaii, you know, since Western contact in 1778, in the 1800s I'm sorry, 1800s into the 1900s, we actually had a very thriving sugar industry in Hawaii, very much. Sugar was king, you know, of Hawaii for a while. Okay, so what we had was a Hawaii Sugar Planters Association made great leaps forward in terms of sugar plant hybridizing, because this, of course, this is another grass. Okay, this is actually a large grass. Okay, so sugarcane too, it will actually do photosynthesis and store sugar, okay, in its stem. Now, not just that, is that these plants don't do what we call C3 photosynthesis, which has to do with a 3-carbon compound. Instead, they actually separate it in terms of space. You have the sugar stored in one place and then it's moved to someplace else. This is what they call a C4 plant. It uses a 4-carbon molecule actually to do the Calvin cycle, okay, to actually do the sugar fixation, right? And here behind me you can see another one, okay, another sugarcane, another variety. Hawaiian people very much cherish their sugarcane plants. And in fact, there's a notation like in history where people probably grew them in their front yard partly for their beauty as well as for the utility. Hello Hello there, here we are in a little bit of a light rain here, okay, in Nuuanu. And I'm standing in front of an Otahite gooseberry plant, okay? This is a little tree over here. There it is up there, you can see some fruits, okay? The fruits are supposed to be very good for making preserves. I wouldn't advise anybody to just eat them as they are because they're very, very sour. But they can be very delicious, yeah, when you add sugar and all the other stuff, pectin and everything else that you do to make preserves. Okay, so that's all this is, Otahite gooseberry, all right? Interesting to note, interesting plant, attractive plant, okay, and here we are. Hello, it's me again, okay? And what we have here, we have a plant. Unfortunately, you can see insect damage of it, okay? This is actually a plant that is showing one of the dangers of native plants here in Hawaii as well as all over the world. Is probably, what's eating it is probably introduced insects. So in Hawaii, we have introduced fungi, introduced insects, introduced probably nematodes and a whole bunch of other kinds of things that prey on native plants. Even though this particular species is not native, it is still a relative of one that is very important. This is an ohia, yeah, but this one happens to be from Tahiti. You can see that the flowers, very similar. Yeah, this plant is in the Myrtaceae, the myrtle family. Relatives of this include eucalyptus, okay? Let's see, also paperbark and such. Also ohia'i, also known as mountain apple. They all tend to have inflorescences like this, a little puffball with the anthers, the stamens sticking out, yeah? So this one happens to be from Tahiti, but it is pointing up the danger that different kinds of native plants all over the world face in terms of insect damage, in terms of other kinds of introduced pests. Now the Hawaiian ohia is noteworthy because it is, some people consider it to be just one species, Metrosideros polymorpha. Polymorpha means many forms. So the different, subspecies or the different groups of ohia are actually living anywhere from the wet forest, the mesic forest, bog area. Some of them are only about this tall, and yet they're full-grown plants capable of flowering and fruiting and everything like that. Metrosideros polymorpha, also known as ohia lehua, is also one of the three main forest trees of the Hawaiian Islands. The others being koa and also iliahi, also known as sandalwood. Very important plant our native ohias are. They're also noteworthy because the wood of that plant was used to make canoe gunnels, right, for one thing. It was also considered to be revered enough to be made into the ki'i, or the wooden images that Hawaiian people made in approximation of their gods. Very important plant spiritually to the Hawaiians, right? Hello again, here we are, okay, under a bay rum tree, okay? Now this tree you can see, it has this beautiful peeling bark. And this is also related to Metrosideros polymorpha, remember that? And also paperbark, and we also have eucalyptus. And they have all, they share a similarity, of course, with their flowers, but many of them also share the similarity of having this really beautiful, textured, peeling kind of bark. Okay, so here, this is bay rum. It's too bad you can't smell it, but it smells very good. Okay, very, very nice, very strong. Okay. Now, what's related to it, okay, this bay rum plant here, is that we have over here a plant known as allspice. So there is actually, if you go into your spice and herbs segment inside of your kitchen, you'll actually see something called allspice. It is actually called allspice because what people can do is they can actually get, the fruit of this plant, grind it up, and it actually smells like a combination of clove, right? Also, let's see, cinnamon and nutmeg. So it was actually named allspice because it was as if all these very valuable spices from the East Indies were all rolled up into one tree. All right? Allspice. All right, great thing. Hi there, people. Can you guess what this is? Think about it. Okay, can you see the word? Maybe not. Now this is a vine. Okay, this is the only orchid that is a vine. And this is an orchid also known as vanilla. Vanilla orchid is actually the source of what is real vanilla. Like when you buy ice cream from a premium ice cream place that has the vanilla seeds inside and everything like that, it comes from this plant. This is the only orchid that is vinous like this. Okay, you can actually see where the adventitious roots are coming out along the side of the stem. Yeah. So this one here is actually growing in like cloud forest or tropical forest, yeah, where there's a lot of moisture in the air. And where does vanilla actually come from the plant? Does it come from the leaf? Does it come from the stem? No, it actually comes from when it flowers, and somebody usually, like in Madagascar or in Tahiti, they usually have people in plantations hand pollinating these flowers. What happens after the plant is pollinated? Well, what happens? You have the development of an ovary, a ripened ovary, which is actually called a fruit. So it is a fruit of the vanilla orchid that actually people ferment, that actually gets a wonderful, complicated vanilla taste. There's nothing like real vanilla. Oftentimes when people do their baking, whether it be cookies, for an occasion, for Girl Scouts, for whatever purposes, generally people use vanilla, flavoring, which is not true vanilla. It's generally artificial. One of the reasons for that is, of course, vanilla is pretty expensive, considering all the trouble people put into in order to actually produce it. So what happens, right? So what happens, you actually get a little bottle of spice. It has 2 vanilla bean pods in it, and it's $8 or something like that. Yeah, very expensive. But do you know, at one point, vanilla was actually the most expensive spice in the world. And it comes to a question, what is the difference between an herb and a spice? Okay, so I've heard of 2 different distinguishments between these two. For one thing, herbs generally are the leafy green parts of a plant. And another explanation is that herbs are actually from European, Mediterranean or European sources, whereas some people say that spices actually come from the flower or from the fruit or from the root or from the bark, okay, of a plant. Or conversely too, another way is that generally these come from areas that are not tropical areas of the world. This is tropical America and etc. Anyway, so this is no longer the most expensive spice in the world, but the most expensive spice in the world is even more dear, of course. Can anybody guess what it is? It's from the crocus. It's called saffron. You know, when you go to an Indian restaurant, or you actually try to cook Indian food or other kind of South Asian cuisines, what happens, sometimes you have saffron rice, very delicately flavored. What they actually do, they actually take the reproductive parts of these crocuses out of the flower. They have to go hand pick them. I think one of the main sources of saffron is Turkey, I believe, yeah? Anyway, so very expensive, very dear spice, as well as saffron, right? And then what happens too is that we have another spice further on that comes from the fruit of a particular tree, not a tree, but it's actually another vine. Okay, we have something called pepper, okay? So what we have is we have what they call black pepper. And they call it that because it's kind of historical in a way. So you see here, this is called Piper nigrum. Okay, it's actually in the same genus as Ava. Yep. Remember, Ava is Piper methysticum. Now this plant here is a vine, and it was known in Europe even from Roman times. In fact, sometimes Roman soldiers were paid in salt. That's where the word salary comes from, and from pepper, because the Roman legions were very poorly provisioned, and it was not uncommon for soldiers in that day to be eating rotten food or meat that had been cooked 2 or 3 days before with no refrigeration. Yeah? So one of the things they did to mask the bad taste of old food was to put spices on them. Okay, black pepper was very important. So pepper actually does have an inflorescence similar to peperomia, and in this particular family there's Piperaceae, and so here you have flower buds, or actually probably developing fruits. Okay, because of course what we actually make pepper out of is actually the fruits. You actually get the fruits, and they're sort of round. All right, and they are actually about this big, okay, the size of peppercorns, and generally they're green, okay, when they're not ripe. And as they ripen, they turn black, kind of grayish black. I don't see any here on this particular. It looks like they're flowering though. Yeah. Anyway, you know the peppercorns that you can get as a gift thing? You can actually get them during the holiday season or other times of the year. You get a little pepper grinder thing, and you have green peppercorns, you have black peppercorns, and sometimes you have red pepper, right? So that is actually good. You can actually grate that up and get that. Now another thing about pepper is you think, okay, where does white pepper come from? Because red pepper comes from a completely different plant, which is capsicum. It's in a completely different family. This is in the Piperaceae, capsicum is in the Solanaceae, totally different family, even though they're both dicots. But generally black pepper, the green peppercorns, of course, is the unripe fruits of these plants. The black peppercorns are actually from the ripe fruits of this plant. So how do you get white pepper? Well, what they do is they'll take the ripe fruit and they'll scrape off the outer coating. Okay, this is why white pepper is so much more expensive than black pepper, because when you think of black pepper, what is it? It has little flakes of black and various shades of gray plus white flakes in there too, right? But if you have white pepper, it's all kind of very finely ground white pepper. So just like everything else that we humans have to do with, the more anybody has to touch something, hold on to something, or process something, the more expensive it is. Yeah, because time is money, and our lives is measured in time. So when you're spending time, you're actually spending your life doing something. That's a good reason to be doing something that makes you happy for a living, you know? Nothing like it, right? Because that's your life. Okay, here we are. We're in Foster Gardens Prehistoric Garden. Very interesting thing, because what we have in here are plants that are, you know, pretty much the end products of many, many hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Yep. During the dinosaur era, okay, these types of plants were among those that were dominant on Earth. And these are cycads, okay? Cycads, some people call them sago palms, even though they're not really palms, all right? If you take a look at some of them, you can see they are palm-like, usually with a rosette of leaves near the top of the stem, okay? So the thing is that these are called sago palms, but they're not palms. These are gymnosperms. Remember, gymnosperm means naked seed. And in fact, in this plant, this particular plant here, all those furry grayish things there, those are female structures, okay? And they bear naked seeds, or the seed born right on the outside of the structure. It's not enclosed within a fruit, right? It's a naked seed. Not just that, is that this particular plant here, okay, is a female plant because it's actually bearing seeds, yeah? Seeds actually come from an egg and a sperm fusing together, and we can kind of see all these different kinds of plants. And right now I'm going to try to show you a male plant, okay, a different species, maybe even a different genus, but this plant will actually have male structures, and that's this one over here, okay? So you can see some cones in here. These are pollen-bearing structures. And somehow pollen from a male plant has to get onto the female structure. Because remember, these are not fruits. These are not flowers. These are cones, or that kind of structure, to bear naked seeds. You can see that they are rather different looking when you take a look at them. But one way that you can tell why something is actually a cycad and not a palm is that if you poke them, they're very hard. I guess the leaves are very, very rigid and very hard as well, okay? Male structures on male plants, female structures on female plants. So what is that called? Okay, it's called dioece. Remember dioece, two houses? Yeah? So this is generally how the cycads do reproduction. Dinosaur food, you know? So these plants have actually outlasted the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs don't walk anymore. The only remnants of them left anymore are the birds. Think about it, yeah, because the aves, or the birds, these are the direct descendants of raptors, okay, or dinosaurs that were kind of carnivorous. And some of the things that are showing that birds are still related to reptiles, yes, is that you have the scales on their legs, right? You have the beaks. And another thing, what else? Generally the feathers are made of keratin, which is just like our skin, our epidermis or epidermal cells, as well as the scales of reptiles. Okay, they all have common structure. That points to common ancestry. All right, but the plants have outlived them. Okay, the groups of plants have actually outlived the dinosaurs, which once were regnant over the whole world. Next thing that we're going to look at in the prehistoric garden here is this plant here. And you might think, oh, this isn't a prehistoric plant, but it actually is, sorta, in a way. A lot of botanists believe that this particular angiosperm, yeah, so this does flower, it does fruit, is probably amongst the oldest of all the different extant kind of angiosperms. It's also known as magnolia. How can we tell that? Well, I don't really have a flower to show you right now, but the flowers of this plant has many, many parts. Generally, you have a whole bunch of sepals, a whole bunch of petals, lots and lots and lots of stamens. So they consider that to be sort of like a primitive condition, you know. Of course, it's not really primitive, but they consider that to be ancestral, whereas a lot of flowers, such as orchids, tend to be what they call derived characteristics. In the olden days, they used to call them advanced conditions. So this southern magnolia is actually one of the most conserved of all the different kinds of flowering plants. Now behind it there, we have something called Netum neeman, okay? Netum neeman. And this is actually a gymnosperm, amazingly. This is like a monotypic plant. You know, it's actually in the natales, all right? And you can see the little reproductive structures on them are actually unfertilized ovules. Okay, so each of those, if it were to be fertilized, would develop into a seed. So this plant does not, even though it looks like a broadleaf, even though it looks like an angiosperm, it is not. It is actually a gymnosperm that bears naked seeds. All right? Okay, prehistoric garden. I bet you know what these things are. Okay, we have orchids. All right, orchids are among the most complex and also among the most so-called advanced of all flowering plants. So here's a display here over at Foster Garden that they have all the time, pretty much. They rotate things. And you can see all kinds of things in here, not just orchids, but other kind of plants as well. Like you can see what they call Christmas cactus. That generally, I guess they call it that because it tends to flower during the winter season oftentimes. You see poinsettias, yeah, which are other euphorbias, yeah, in the Euphorbiaceae. And of course, the parts that you see that are red, those are not petals, yeah, because these are actually colored leaves that we call bracts. Do you remember bracts that we were talking about? Yeah. So when you're looking at all these flowers, you can see all different kinds of orchids as well as that bromeliad over here. Okay, you have what's left of a blue dendrobium. This is what orchid breeders often call blue, even though it's not blue like the sky, it's not blue like the ocean, but that's just about the closest approximation you can get to blue in dendrobiums, now at least. Okay, you never know what's going to happen in the future. And in fact, people have been able to think about getting a gene for blue flower color out of certain kind of orchids, including one called Disa from South Africa, and also another called Thelymitra, which is from Australia. These are true blue orchids, so if they can actually figure out what gene or which genes are responsible for the blue flower color, could you imagine they could shoot it into the genome of any of these kind of orchids, and you might be able to come up with a blue Cattleya or a blue dendrobium, true blue, you know, not more this violet blue color. So from that sort of art shade, purple and yellow, to that golden yellow, to this tricolor one here, to that other one here, etc., all the way up to the end, except for that one, well, actually that one too in the center. These are all members of the Cattleya tribe. These are all related to each other. There are 25,000 species of orchids in the world. There might be tens of thousands of hybrids. Now the thing is, how does that happen? Okay, what happens is that the plants in nature are reproductively isolated from each other. Generally, orchids have a specific pollinator, and there's all kinds of ways that orchids can be pollinated, you know. But generally, in the wild, you do have some hybridization going on where one species can cross with another. But generally, the divisions of these, you have, let's see, I'm just going to rattle off some names. Don't worry about remembering them or anything, but it's just the concept that's important. You have Brotonia, represented by that little flower aloft there. You have Cattleya, you have Laelia, you have Sophronides, you have Schomburgkia, you have a whole bunch of different things. Brassivola, etc. Okay, a whole bunch of them. These are all distinct genera. Their genus are different from each other on the genus level, but they can actually cross-pollinate by humans doing the pollination. So generally, when you make orchid hybrids, you would take pollen from one parent or the pollen parent, and you put it on the stigma, the female part of the pod parent, the one that's going to make the fruit. Okay, so these are all what they call intergeneric hybrids. You have like a Brassivola or Rhyncholaelia crossed to a Cattleya, or a Laelia crossed to a Brotonia, and etc. So you can get a whole different bunch in terms of shape, in front of all the different kind of colors. So one of the things you notice, all of these are orchid hybrids. The only one that isn't really a Cattleya or a Dendrobium is that one that's a little hard to see there with the white lip. Remember, they have a lip or labellum. Yeah, that is an Oncidium, probably Oncidium shari baby, which has a nice kind of deep smell to it, very sweet, very appetizing, very good. Oncidium shari baby. Well, so the rest are all Cattleya hybrids with probably 2, 3, 4, 5 or more different genera making up these individual plants. So you can see that these different kinds of orchids are actually reproductively isolated from each other, generally by the fact that they have different pollinators. They just have different pollinators, okay? Now if we were to move over a little bit and take a look in this other window here, one of the things that you might be able to see fairly well is this plant here with the parallel veins. This is a plant that is at least related to a native plant in Hawaii, and this is something that people call uki uki, all right, Dianella sandwichensis. So it is actually a monocot, It is in the Liliaceae, in the lily family, and you can see that bright purple, bright blue fruit. Okay, so it was used by Hawaiian people for the leaves have strings in them that you could make fiber, cordage from. And these berries with the purple or blue fruits in them actually had been used by Hawaiian people after contact to make blue kapa or bark cloth. This is true. I'm not making it up. It might sound like I'm making it up, but I'm not. So Hawaiian kapa, after contact had 3 different colors that other people didn't have. They had blue from the uki uki, they had pink from the akala, also known as a Hawaiian raspberry, and they had green, which is kind of interesting, from the ma'o, or Hawaiian cotton. Anyway, so that is not an orchid, of course. It's a uki uki Dianella salmatensis. You also have here, this looks like calanthe or a phaeus of some kind. This is not a Cattleya relative, but that little one over there with the kind of greenish segments with the white lips sticking out, that is probably either Brassivola nodosa or a relative. It could be another Brassivola, and generally if it was Brassivola nodosa, that would be Lady of the Night orchid. They call it Lady of the Night because where it's from, in tropical Americas, in the nighttime it has a wonderful, very strong scent, very sweet. And in fact, when I lived at my parents' house a long time ago, my father had a greenhouse right outside my window, and in the wintertime you'd have this wonderful smell of the Lady of the Night orchid coming into my room, And here's another Cattleya, a standard type of Cattleya with the nice big segments, big broad brasso lip that it shows there. So a lot of what we're seeing here are different kinds of orchid hybrids. You see another Christmas cactus. Oh, and another thing I forgot to point out, you see that pendant structure hanging down? That's not an inflorescence, and that isn't an orchid. That is actually the modified lip of something called a pitcher plant. Okay, a pitcher plant. So this is actually a plant that is carnivorous. It will actually trap, drown, and absorb nutrients from insects and other kinds of animals. Okay, I think they call it Nepenthes. You ever heard the poem Nepenthe, Nepenthe? Yeah, I think that's Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. So we have here more Cattleyas. You have a little typical type of Hawaiian dendrobium. Okay, even though Hawaii used to be in the forefront of hybridization in dendrobiums in the world, but I think since then, in its heyday in the 1950s and into the 1960s and even into the 1970s, where very famous, world famous researchers at UH did their hybridization, then I think it has passed to Thailand and also to Taiwan as well for a lot of the orchid hybrids. Yeah, partly because I think in some places the labor is much less expensive than it is here, which isn't a bad thing for people here, It's because of a living wage that people are able to go to school and have the nice lives that they have. All right, so we also have other Cattleyas. Look at that tricolor one over there. It's yellow with little tips, of magenta or purple. Okay, so you have a whole different kind of orchid thing here. So I would encourage you that if you have a chance and you have the time to go and see some of the orchid shows that we have in Honolulu. They're among the best in the world. Okay, orchids. Right, here we are at a plant that is known as the crown of thorns. Okay, if you were to take a look at these structures here, they sort of look like flowers, individual flowers, but that's appearances can be deceiving. If you were to take a look inside of it, you'd see a whole bunch of reduced flowers and makes up an inflorescence, and these structures here are merely bracts. Okay, remember bracts are colored leaves or modified leaves, that impersonate a petal, which will then allow for pollination. Now, another thing that you might notice about this plant is it has all these pokies on it, So these are actually stem modifications. They're actually sticking out of the stem, right? So these are actually surface features of the stem. You might think that these are cacti, but they're not. They're actually euphorbs. They're related to the gooseberry that we looked at earlier. They're related to the kukui that we saw earlier as well. Okay, so these are actually an example of what they call convergent evolution or parallel evolution, where you have two lineages evolving morphologies or body forms that look, at least superficially, similar to each other, but that are very different. I guess, in fact, it is not what we call homology. Homo means the same. Ology, like in terms of animals, you have, say, the flipper of a dolphin, or you have the forepaws of a cat. They believe that both of these come from ancestral structures, so they actually are related to each other, or they're homologous. Whereas these are analogous to the spines on a cactus, because cactuses, the spines sticking out are actually modified leaves, whereas this is a modification of the surface of the stem. Okay, so crown of thorns. Another reason why I wanted to show you these plants is because they're very popular right now in Aotearoa, also known as New Zealand. Yeah, very popular. So people apparently can't keep them on the shelves. So this might be an interesting thing to watch, yeah, and kind of take a look at. Now these probably, of course, like the cacti, grew in places and evolved in places that are dry or arid, because desert area or dry area is actually what characterizes a desert. You could have a hot desert or you could have a cold desert, right? Cold deserts include things like the Gobi Desert, which is at a pretty high altitude, but still very dry. So a desert is that kind of situation, and here you have the crown of thorns. Well, anyway, so we'll see you next time, and I hope that you enjoyed, today's trip over to Foster Botanical Garden, and we'll just continue, all right? So take care. Bye-bye.